Alright, welcome back to lesson 3. We're adding and subtracting rational expressions. So if you have trouble adding and subtracting fractions, you might want to go and spend a little bit more time on that before you add and subtract rational expressions. Anytime you add or subtract any type of fraction, you are looking for a common denominator. So sometimes you're going to get a gift where they already have a common denominator. You do not need a common denominator in order to multiply or divide. You do need a common denominator to add or subtract. Now, the adding and subtracting portion, the only difference is with subtraction is you have to worry about distributing a negative number when you're combining like terms. That's the only difference really between addition and subtraction. You're looking for a common denominator, you're bringing the numerators together as a single numerator, you're combining like terms, you may have to factor to simplify. Those are pretty much your steps there. So I have two kind of easier examples. If you notice, number 1 has a common denominator. The denominator is n plus 4 in both of those fractions. So I do not have to find a common denominator, it's already there. So what I'm going to do, once you have a common denominator, you only need to write it one time. And then you bring the numerators together. Now this is addition, so I don't have to worry about distributing a negative, but this is just going to be m plus 4 over m plus 4, and m plus 4 divided by m plus 4 we know is going to cancel and give us 1, but we do have to say that m is not allowed to be negative 4. So we do have a restriction still. Sometimes it'll ask for it, sometimes it'll just be focusing on can you add and subtract. Hopefully by now you know that there are restrictions. I may or may not do the restrictions as I go through these. It just kind of depends on your quiz, on your tests, things like that. You have to be aware, are they asking for it or not? But really probably with these they're focusing on can you add and subtract them more so than the restrictions. Alright, let's look at the bottom. Alright, so I've got n over 1 minus n plus 1 over n minus 1. Now, my denominators are very similar. They're not exactly the same, and it may be trying to hide something on us. So let's look to see, is something hiding on me? Could I factor out something? And indeed I can. If I factor out, actually let me do this. Let me write it in standard form. You might be able to see it a little bit better. So I pulled the n first, and then I put the 1 last. And if you notice, these are the same with the exception of the signs are different, right? This one's negative, this one's positive, this one's positive, this one's negative. So if I divide by negative 1, I get n minus 1, which would mean that this piece and this piece match, which would lead me to an easier common denominator. But what that means is when I build a common denominator, I have to have all the pieces of each fraction. So I have to have an n minus 1 because they're in, actually this is in both fractions, but it's present in at least one fraction. The other thing I need is a negative 1 because this fraction has it, this fraction needs it. So for a common denominator, I have to have all the pieces in both fractions, in the denominators of both fractions, I should say. Now, because this one has both parts, this is not going to change. N is going to be n in the first fraction. N plus, now this is going to have to change, this 1. So I'm going to go ahead and put n plus, and I have to figure out how I'm going to make n minus 1 look exactly like this denominator. And it looks like I just need to multiply by negative 1. Now, I'm also going to multiply by negative 1 in the numerator. I know I wrote on my plus sign, but this is really negative 1 over negative 1, which is really, I'm just multiplying by 1. If I multiply by 1, I'm not changing the value of any fraction. I'm just changing how it looks. So I'm going to multiply negative 1 times 1 and get negative 1. And then actually this is, let me rewrite this, this is n minus 1 over negative 1 n minus 1. Now, I can see that I'm going to have some canceling occur. I can go ahead and cancel, and I really end up with 1 over negative 1, which is negative 1. Now, these don't always turn out so nicely. The last two examples, have had nice answers. That's why I like math, because you can take something that looks really, really complicated and get something that's really nice. It's one of the reasons why I like it. So n is not allowed to be 1 is also part of my answer. Alright, my restricted value. So that's the first two examples. I wanted to give you something a little bit on the easy side so that some of you with adding and subtracting fractions freak out. I don't want you to freak out. I want you to realize all you got to do is find a common denominator. You may have to make some changes to some fractions by multiplying by something over itself, but it is something that you can do. I know you can do this. So baby steps, see what you can do in the next video.